there, thank you so much for watching, listening today. I'm super excited to continue our series. We started it last week and I'd kind of like to label this Christmas in Motion. We're talking about Jesus. Obviously Jesus is why we have Christmas, kind of ground zero. I always have this like kind of cheesy little figurine, and I've been using this little figurine for, I don't know, a couple years now, doing some series around Jesus' birth and looking for Jesus in the midst of a busy season. And I want to continue the series that we're doing this year in relation to Christmas in Motion. And last week we talked about Mary and Joseph in motion. They traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Took them about 4 days to a week to make that journey by walking. Remember, at that time, Mary's around 9 months pregnant, we suspect. And so that was a challenging, difficult journey for sure. But, you know, as you think about the Christmas story, when we are aware of it, there's also, I think, really important to consider that there are other participants in the Christmas story that we know of that were in motion. And so last week we looked at Mary and Joseph. This week we're going to look at the Magi, the wise men from the East. They were in motion. And they're interesting because a lot of historians, they say, well, you know, they might have come from like Mesopotamia, even potentially Persia, because they had the idea of wise men. They were known as astronomers, astrologists, and you know, they were considered educated in the stars and kind of tradition and religion, a little bit of mythology. So kind of this mix of things. But it's interesting because they saw a star and they followed the star. So they were in motion. And it's really interesting that they left their homeland. They left everything they knew that was familiar and comfortable because they saw the star that was the symbol for the newborn king. And they followed this star all the way from Mesopotamia, Persia, all the way from far in the east. And they walked their way, or rode camels, all the way to what we know as Judea, as far as Jerusalem. And when you look at that, that's a long, long journey. If you take a camel, it's at least 2 to 3 weeks to go from that far east all the way to Jerusalem. And if you go by foot, it's at least a month. That's a long journey. And that's motion, that's continual motion. And I bring it to your attention because our modern Christmas seems to have a lot of activity, a lot of things running around, a lot of busyness, a lot of parties, a lot of festivities, a lot of things we got to go to, concerts, this, that, you know, all this stuff. And there's a lot of motion. But I want us to think about motion on purpose, that we don't just let the holiday drive us, but we have some intention and some purpose for all of the motion. Now, I recognize that you and I, we both probably have some obligations and duties, things that we have to do that are associated with this holiday. Parties we have to attend, or, you know, it's obligatory, whatever. But I want us to be conscientious as well that we make decisions and choices with our actions, with our motion, with our time, with our attention, in a purposeful way. So the reason I bring this to your attention is because the Magi, wise men from the East, they had a focal point for their travel. They had a purpose, they had a destination, they were aiming at something. It wasn't just kind of haphazard, random, frenzied activity with no productivity. They had an end game, a goal. They knew this is the star, it's directing and guiding our steps, our decisions, and we land here and then we'll figure out what we do from there when we get to Jerusalem, when the star aligned for their arrival. And so I think it's important for us to think about and be purposeful about our activities over the course of this holiday season. We can get caught in the gerbil wheel, you know, endless churn, run, burn, scamper, scurry of the season. And I've done that more than a few years. But I think we could also choose to say, you know, I recognize the obligations that I have, but I'm also going to be purposeful about my destination, about my end game. What am I aiming for? Because at the end of the day, this is why we do Christmas. We do Christmas for Jesus. And let us recognize that Jesus is our crosshairs. And knowing Jesus, recognizing Jesus, increasing our relationship, our connection, our awareness with Jesus. Jesus is our end game. And in the midst of all the hustle and bustle, let's not get distracted with the frantic activities. Let's stay attentive and focused. And so what are some ways you might be able to do that? Well, I think it was interesting, the star, the wise men followed the star. And one of the things to think about, it's possible, I could be wrong, but it's definitely possible. You know, stars, you see them the best at night, right? You don't see stars as well in the daytime. So it's possible that the wise men made their journey largely at nighttime so they could follow that star with greater clarity and vision, rather than in the daytime when you couldn't see it very well. And I think sometimes it's important for us to remember that sometimes in some of those darkness and some of the things that are less clear to us, that if we'll focus, center in with Jesus and keep Jesus as the fundamental crosshairs, this is who we're chasing. This is who we live for. This is our passion, who we desire to look like, to imitate, to be like Christ. Then I think that can help clarify some of the things that might seem frenzied or hustled or murky or unclear or lack of priority. What's happening here? But I think when we keep Jesus as front and center in our journey and we keep moving, might be a snail's pace. We might be the tortoise and the hare. You know, some of us are a little more of the tortoise speed and some of us are kind of the harried speed, if you will. But no matter what, whatever the speed, small, quick, fast, whatever. But let's always keep the direction clear in our hearts and our minds that Jesus is, cliche, the reason for the season, the passion for our pursuit, the goal of our affections, the center of our joy, that Jesus is the end all be all, and that we live to know him more, to be increasingly in love with him. I love what Paul says in Philippians. I consider everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus, for whose sake I've lost everything. I consider everything lost compared to the greatness of knowing Christ. So let's keep Jesus as the front and center crosshairs, as our focal point for the busyness and the motion of this season. And let's remember that in the midst of the motion, Jesus is center and first and foremost for everything we do and our passions. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, listening. Hit the notification bell right there. Super helpful to let you know when we have new content up. Here's a question for you to think about. In this holiday season, what is the most distracting thing for you? You're like, what is the most distracting? Well, if you had to prioritize Jesus as the crosshairs, what distracts you the most? You're like, oh, everything. Right, I get it. But I think that sometimes there's some key things that could be the biggest distraction. So just something for you to think about. You can leave that answer in the comments there and kind of ruminate on that. And of course, we have an amazing joke. Little tongue in cheek there. So why is a nose? A nose can never be 12 inches long. Why is that? Because it would be a foot if it was 12 inches long. And a nose cannot be a foot. I know, it's really stupid, but next week will be so much better.